Hello, folks. I am Rebecca Adams, and I have with me Becky Vermeer. Say hello, Becky. One more
Hi.
time. Yeah, one. In case you
Happy
have never
Monday.
seen it. What's that?
I said happy Monday.
Yes, absolutely. In case you have never seen any of our videos before, we have a lot of fun on here. So yeah, it's on a regular basis. We enjoy our dogs and just having fun. Uh, we have a lot in common. We've done
Yeah.
guitar playing and singing and um, a lot of other fun stuff like that that we can really identify with. One thing we were talking about before we started recording, I was very interested, and I put this on my list for Becky for possible topics. What does what does it look like in an abusive relationship when a crisis comes up? Maybe there's a death in the family, or there's a car accident, or like in my case, there was one particular time where I had a miscarriage, and I don't know if I can put it into words. It heightened it, but it didn't um, when that happened. Um, Have you seen that happen with women that are in the crisis center, and what does it look like inside the home? What does it look like if they escape during that time? What can you say to address this?
Well, I mean, to start just off the top of my head, to start addressing the conversation, we've talked before about how abusive relationships are more than just physically abusive, that there's emotional abuse and there's spiritual abuse and there's intellectual abuse. And so when we have these moments in our lives where they're painful, a
Mhm.
miscarriage, for example, or a trauma like a car accident or whatever else, when we have those moments in our lives, what we really need, if we're the victim of the accident or we're the one that physically had the miscarriage, what we need is we need somebody who's willing to take a look at us, recognize that our emotions are the priority, so
Mhm.
then create a safe space for us to be able to feel our feelings.
That's good.
And when you go through any kind of trauma at all, you go through a gamut of feelings. You
Mhm.
go through shock, anger, rage, depression, grief, sometimes uncontrollable laughter, depending upon, what moment, where you're at in the moment of time in the healing journey. And so what we really need when we're going through those kind of things is somebody who is emotionally present.
Mhm.
They're emotionally present. They have the ability to put themselves on the back burner for a second
Mhm.
and truly feel like, or say and show, it's all about you and what can I do to take care of you.
That's good.
But
Mhm.
unfortunately, when we're talking about someone who's in an abusive relationship, most of the time, the abuser doesn't have the ability to do that. We've talked before about abusive behavior and how abusers call the shots and they're all motivated by the power and control. And so, in order for an abuser to be emotionally present, means they have to relinquish power and control.
Mhm.
And that's not in their repertoire. That's not what they do.
No.
And so, if you're a victim of domestic violence, you're in that situation where you're needing your partner to be there for you, show up, it's not going to happen.
No.
So then in addition to grieving the loss or feeling the pain or going through the trauma, in addition to that, you're also doing it completely isolated and alone,
Mhm. Mhm.
even if there's another person in the household.
Yep.
And so as painful as it is for someone to go through those things, it's compounded exponentially.
It really is.
And you and I have talked before, and I'll share a little bit now. I grew up in a home environment where I had probably the best male role model I've ever seen. My dad was amazing. My dad is still amazing. My dad has always been a man that I look at with admiration. He's always been someone who understands emotions and how to process them. And even as a young child, my dad was emotionally present for me. Today, where I am in my life, my dad is emotionally present for me. And so he set the bar really high for my life as far as, what's a man supposed to be in your life? They're supposed to be your caretaker, your provider, emotionally available, the shoulder to cry on or partner with, cry with.
Mm-hmm.
And the good thing about my dad that has always impressed me is my dad is a cry with kind of man. He
Wow.
feels his feelings too. And so he established for me as a young child, it's okay to feel your feelings because he always felt his feelings.
Wow.
So anything less than that in my life would fail in comparison.
Wow.
And
You
so I know that there are plenty of women who find themselves in abusive relationships who came from an emotionally strong family,
mm-hmm.
who are capable, they're women who are capable of feeling their feelings and defining where they're at in that grief process or what that trauma means to them. And then the shock of being with another person who somehow now all of a sudden that's not okay.
Mm-hmm.
It makes no sense. Like, how do you process that?
Well, and I knew, I don't even know how to say it. I keep saying that, but it was the emotion in the home. It was I knew what I could and could not do
Mhm,
without even asking or attempting to, whatever that was.
mhm,
I knew that control was so strong in the home. And so when I had, for example, when I had the miscarriage, it just absolutely devastated me. It for years, I could not even talk about it without just bawling because I wanted that child. I really, really wanted that child. And there was just, yet I didn't feel the freedom at all to cry and grieve like I needed to. At the time we were resident managers of an apartment complex. And so literally he could pop in and out one time or 5 times during the day. And I knew
mhm.
that he could not walk in on me just absolutely sobbing my eyes out and be okay with it. I knew there was going to be a comment of some sort. Um, so yeah, there was no freedom there. So go ahead with what you were saying. I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, that's all I was going to say, but let's talk about that scenario for a second, because I know we're motivated by domestic violence, education, etc. But I also know that there are millions of women across the globe who've experienced that same thing, myself included. And the pain of a miscarriage is unlike any other. Um, there's no really words to describe it. And so if you yourself are going through that type of trauma without even really having the words to describe it,
Mhm.
if you're with somebody, let's say, who is an abusive person, the expectation they place on you is you have to say what's wrong or shut up about it,
Mhm.
for example,
Mhm.
or okay, I'm done looking at your face, stop hanging a face and let's move on, or
Mhm.
dare I say abusers who are saying, well, it's your fault. I mean, you
Yep.
were carrying the child so clearly you must have done something wrong, so it's your fault.
Mhm.
It's one of those things that you don't outwardly show anybody, but the grief that you carry, like you said you did, carried for years. And I know my own personal experience, I as well carried that grief for multiple years before I was finally able to process it and let it go. It's
Mhm.
just so painful. And
Mhm.
when you find yourself in a relationship with someone, emotionally vacant is the word that I use, or just emotionally vacant. An abuser is motivated to maintain power and control over their victim. That's the one thing that separates an abuser from other people.
Mhm.
They use multiple tactics of power and control because they're motivated, no, multiple tactics against their victims because they're motivated to maintain power and control over them. It's intentional, it's purposeful, it's done all day, every day with a plan of action in mind. That's what someone who is an abuser is and does. There's a whole other category of people that are not abusers that can have issues with intimacy or issues with expressing emotions, issues with feeling emotion, with knowing how to respond to another person who's emotional. It doesn't make them an abuser. It makes them ill-equipped. There's a big difference. So you can be ill-equipped to be emotionally involved in a relationship and still not be an abuser. You're just ill-equipped. And that's the difference. And so we have to pay attention to that. We always have to keep that message in front of our faces that an abuser does what an abuser does on purpose. Intentional, intentional, intentional. Someone else may have grown up in a home where they didn't see mom and dad hug each other, or there was no niceties between each other, or you can't cry, or whatever it is, suck it up and deal with it, or you know, whatever that was. And so they may, as an adult man, for example, may enter a relationship and just be emotionally vacant, not because they're an abuser, but because they're incapable. They just don't know how.
And that your description is really good. It brings to mind somebody that I know that it doesn't matter if it's early in the morning when you see them, late at night, middle of the day, whatever, a surprise, not a surprise. You see them and their eyes are just vacant. And back when they were a child, the mother died and the kids were not able to say goodbye to mom. And this particular person was the oldest in the family. And I have always attributed it to that. And no, she's not, she doesn't exert any kind of power and control over other people. So, okay, that makes sense.
If you're not taught how to process emotions, you don't know how to process emotions. It doesn't make you a bad person.
That's good.
It just means you don't know how to process emotions.
Yeah.
A challenging person to have an intimate relationship with, because you don't know how to process emotion.
Right.
And so if you get into a relationship with someone who doesn't know how to process emotion, and your expectation is, this is my partner who is going to be there for me, that we can talk about the challenging issues of life and we're on the same level, and all of a sudden you realize you're not on the same level, it can be incredibly challenging. That doesn't make that person an abuser.
Okay, thank you.
And so, you know, I can tell you some experiences in my own personal life. Initially, in my initial marriage, I would have never used the word abuser in the direction of the husband that I was married to. But there was an emotional vacancy. A safe space was not established for me to feel feelings. Or, you know, in a situation where if you find yourself in a relationship with someone who's emotionally vacant and you find yourself apologizing for the way that you feel, you should never have to apologize for the way that you feel.
That's right.
And so that's the difference is, you know, that person's not an abuser. They're just not capable.
Yeah.
But it's still just as damaging and it's still just as challenging when trauma does arise. For example, you know, me alluding to having a miscarriage, it's challenging to go through something like that when you're in a relationship with someone who's emotionally vacant. It's compounded exponentially to go through something like that with someone who's a narcissistic, abusive person who doesn't care that you have feelings at all.
Very much so.
And so, you know, the initial topic of, is it challenging for victims of domestic violence to handle life crisis? Absolutely. Because in essence, you know, the main thing that we're looking for in an intimate partner relationship is a safe space to feel the way that I feel, which means you celebrate my joys with me. You celebrate my accomplishments, my triumphs, my victories. You celebrate my defeats, my surgeries, my pains. You celebrate, you know, or not celebrate, but you're there with me on, you know, so the good emotions are acceptable and the ones that are more challenging are acceptable. If you don't have that in your life, it stymies you in your ability to move past grief, process the emotion or whatever else.
And I found that because I didn't really feel the freedom or feel like I had the freedom to fully grieve, I stuffed it down, and about 2.5 years later, it came back up like an emotional volcano.
Mhm.
And I learned from that the hard way. And I tell people when they've lost a child, lost in a miscarriage, or they lose a family member, I tell them, look, don't try to put yourself any kind of a time frame of when you should be over this. Because like I said, it took me years and years and years before I could not just dissolve into a puddle of tears at the thought of losing that child. But I also tell them, make sure that you freely and fully grieve,
Mhm.
because I learned that the hard way. It's so important.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
We have to, not only do we have to give ourselves permission to do that, but if we're in a relationship with someone, they need to give us permission to do that as well. In the
Mhm.
same respect that we need to give them permission to feel their feelings.
Mhm.
Stuffing grief is a really bad choice because it comes out. It comes out at some point. We were having a conversation in support group on Thursday night, and the topic was emotionally charged. And one person sitting in the support group got emotional, understandably so, and began to cry and said, I've never been, I don't even know how to express the way that I'm feeling because it's been so long since I've been allowed to express the way that I'm feeling.
Yeah.
So, coming out of a relationship with someone who's abusive to you, emotionally abusive for sure, her partner was abusive in other ways as well, but that emotional abusive part of it where you can't feel your feelings.
Mhm.
So it comes out in other ways. I mean, you get an ulcer, you have gastrointestinal issues, you have arthritis, you have unexplained aches and pains, you have migraines, whatever that is, because we're not in a safe space where we can feel our feelings. And there is no timeline on grief. Like you just said, like if you read the stages of grief, you can go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth for years in those stages of grief before you get to that place where it's okay,
Mhm.
I let it go.
Mhm.
And if you're in tune enough with your emotions, sometimes you can actually pinpoint this was the day that I let it go.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so like I know in my own life when I struggled with the pain of experiencing the miscarriage that I experienced and the years that I carried that pain, I know the day that I let it go. I
That-
know where I was, I know what time of day it was, I know what I was doing, and I know when I let it go.
That's awesome.
But that was a grief that I carried that I had to deal with and process a lot on my own.
Mhm. Well, just to kind of compare, today is the 1 year anniversary of when my mom died. And it's not painful for me. In fact, it feels like it's been probably 5 years since she died, and it's just been a year. Now I can sit here and talk to you about the dog that I lost, and we have him on some of our older videos.
Uh-huh.
And that is still very tender in my heart. And I've shown everybody, I have the locket that has some of his ashes in there.
Mhm.
See, with mom, I was able to pre-grieve for years because I saw her gradually slipping away. And so I was
Mhm.
able to pre-grieve. With him, no, it was just all of a sudden, it was one day, it was like, what's happened to you? And then
Right.
he kind of snapped out of it, and he lasted about another week and a half. And, so there wasn't that. And with my
Right.
miscarriage, for people who don't understand, you've had a family member or a friend that you have literally, maybe you've held them in your arms as they were sick or in the hospital or dying, but you didn't necessarily have a lot of notice. And so when that happens, just like with the miscarriage, I had never held that child. I didn't know if it was boy or girl. I didn't know the facial features, you know, what their hands, their little fingers look like, nothing. And so when you lose that child, it is sudden and it's without warning. And it is a major loss because it's someone that you have bonded with deeply as a mom, and guys can't understand that, but you have bonded with that baby and all of a sudden it's gone and you feel like it's your fault. It's not, but you feel like it's your fault. And I think, Becky, you had said something to that effect, that some abusers might even say, well, it's your fault.
It's your fault, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know, people don't understand that. You're right, because the instant a woman finds out she's pregnant, if it's a pregnancy that she's wanting,
Mm-hmm.
she's instantly joyful and instantly begins that bonding process with that life that's growing inside of her. And as each day that goes by, you want more and more to meet this person and to hold this person in your arms. And you've got that such a strong connection that when they're just suddenly taken away like that, I mean, my arms ached for months. They
Mm-hmm.
just ached. And you can't explain that to somebody. Like, there wasn't anything physically wrong with me, but they just ached to hold that baby that I was never going to get to hold. And I mean, it's painful to process. And even well-meaning people don't know how to help somebody going through a grief process like that, honestly.
Well, and I don't know about you, but I didn't even have like a grave site to go to. I had nothing. You know, with my dog, I've got some of his ashes here, but with that baby that I lost, I had nothing. I really had nothing.
Yeah.
There was no little outfit they had worn because they'd never been born, you know,
Right.
and there was just literally nothing to hang on to. It was felt like I was stranded out in space and not even floating, not even falling, just out there with nothing to hang on to.
Mm-hmm. And the fact that it just happened doesn't change the fact how desperately you wanted that child.
No.
And so you still desperately want that child.
Yep, exactly. And my ex he couldn't identify with any of that at all. And I never saw him cry over the loss of our child. It was, it was strange because my mom had always been, there was one thing she definitely was, she was nurturing. And she would take care of somebody while they were sick and watch over them and, you know, feed them correctly, whatever they needed, make sure they took their medicine, but deeply cared about them and felt so sorry for them that they, you know, had an accident or whatever it was.
Mm-hmm.
And so to go from that into the marriage, we were talking about that before we got on camera. And I don't think I had ever made that connection, Becky. That says so much. Tell us about your connection from your kind, caring parents over to what happened with your miscarriage and how that affected you.
Well, I mean, of course, my parents were emotionally available to me and tried to say all the right things and offered prayer and hugs and all of those things. And so, when I sobbed in the arms of my mom.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because like your mother, she was nurturing and caring, and she knew that she didn't have to say anything. What do you say? But then the challenge is, again, I keep using that expression, emotionally vacant.
Mm-hmm.
What's someone who's emotionally vacant? The position they put you in is you have to carry the load completely by yourself.
Oh, that's good.
And so and I'm not suggesting for 1 second that the other person's not affected by it, but when they don't have the ability to process the emotions or show their emotions, it seems as if they're just completely removed from the grief. And
Mm-hmm.
so, it's moments like those where you need a strong person that you can really count on and even partner in the grief with.
Mm-hmm.
And the way, you partner to create a child, so you need someone that you can partner in the grief with. And
Mm-hmm.
when you don't have that partner, the loneliness is overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
And so then, we've talked before in former programs about expectations in relationships and things like that. And so if you're someone like me who came out of a home environment where I was raised by two functioning people who were both emotionally intact and were willing to show that my parents are not saints. They make mistakes like everybody else. I've seen them both lose their temper. They've lost their temper in my direction as a child. Like, I'm not trying to create a next to God experience here.
Right.
But in their humanness, they had the ability, still to be present. And so if that's the expectation you have when you're entering into a relationship and you've been duped, so to speak, thinking that this person is going to be there for you as well, it just compounds that pain so much. And so going from one environment where you're encouraged to feel your feelings and you're nurtured through feeling your feelings to an environment where I don't know what to do with your feelings, so please don't have them because I can't nurture you through them. It creates a
Mm-hmm.
void of separation to where you stuff and you stuff and you stuff, and that's just unhealthy.
Mm-hmm.
So then both people become unhealthy in that situation because one person makes it abundantly clear that it's not a safe space for you to share your emotions. And so if you're the one trying to share the emotions, then you stuff and stuff and stuff. And so that becomes unhealthy. And so then this falsehood of everything's fine when everything's not fine.
Mm-hmm.
And that takes a toll on any relationship as well.
What would you say to somebody who is in a relationship like that? And let's go ahead and go to the abuser who is emotionally vacant. And there is a family crisis, some sort of crisis that comes up, car accident, whatever. What are you going to say to them to help them cope and to know what their next steps should be? I mean, they just can't do this alone.
No. Find your network of support. I mean, that's the important thing, is hopefully you're in a position where you do have a network of support. Now, what we know to be true about abusers are all about isolating you from your network of support.
Mhm.
And so, if you're in that situation where you have no network of support, you're an island. I would say try to find support
Mhm.
if the abuser allows for it at all, because you're not going to find it from the abuser.
Right.
Hopefully there's a person in your life. If there's not, I mean, that's why every shelter that I know of has a crisis hotline. You can
Mm.
always find somebody to talk to. I mean, the difference is a network of support is usually built around people with commonalities, common interests, and built around trust.
Mhm.
For calling a cold call number, so to speak, is not necessarily a built on trust relationship, but
Mhm.
we have to be able to have a safe space to feel our feelings and to talk about the things that we're going through. And if we don't have that safe space, again, it will physically take its toll on us.
Mhm.
And so that would be the encouragement, is if you're in an abusive situation where you're dealing with a partner who's emotionally vacant and abusive, you're going to go through some stuff. You still need to be able to process through it. And so if you've been isolated from your known network of support, there are still people that you can contact. There's still ways to have conversations around it.